And welcome back to Washington Commanders Insider. Today we're talking about day number 16 of training camp for the Washington Commanders, as we'll be looking at the key insights and takeaways from that. Next, we're going to be talking about the roster moves that the Washington Commanders have recently made. So before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the key takeaways here from day 16 of training camp for the Washington Commanders. And so I always like to start with what Coach Dan Quinn says before practice. And so we'll be paraphrasing this and just looking at the key insights from that. And so the first thing that Dan Quinn is asked about is what he liked from yesterday's burgundy and gold inter-squad scrimmage that they had there. And so he says that number one, he liked the defense. He liked how aggressive they were, how they got downhill, how they got into their run fits. He does, point out the fact that they could not get into full tackling. And then he also talks about just the defensive line just being aggressive. And so he liked how they played aggressive there at the scrimmage. And so those are the first two notes out of what he liked. And then he talks about what he wanted to really get out of this as far as moving different players into some different situations and seeing what they could do, and also to the coaches as well. And so starting with the players, one of the examples that I have down here is that he's talking about Jalen Lane lining up on the outside as a wide receiver and then getting a chance to do some of these deeper routes and things like that. And so, that's huge, especially for Jalen Lane coming in as a rookie. You get a chance to work a little bit more, on the route tree like that, and that's going to help you become a little bit more of a complete receiver. And so, I thought that was a great example. Next thing that he talks about, from a player standpoint, is he does talk about Jacob Martin and also to Dorrance Armstrong, and then putting them at the defensive end and lining them up over guards and then allowing them to go out there and pass rush. And so Dorrance Armstrong, Jacob Martin getting a chance to line up over guards as defensive ends and go after it as far as pass rushers. And so that is something that he talks about. And then just circling back, to the coaching point here, and how that really helps because Dan Quinn went ahead, he split up the coaches and really puts them into different responsibilities and things like that. And so, that helps the coaches grow because they get a chance to, take on different situations. And I think that with that experience, that's something that you can really grow with here, either on the staff or on your next stop as a coach. And I think that it's actually both because you will grow, as a coach, but you're also going to take that experience, obviously to the next opportunity if, some of these coaches decide to do so. So, just a great situation there, for the players and coaches to develop as we continue on in training camp. And so the next thing that he talks about with this inter-squad scrimmage that the Commanders had is he talks about the cornerback play. And he says that he did like how they were able to disguise things at times. And so that's something that he points out. He talks about Mikey Sammerstill, which that is a player that we continue to talk about because it does seem like that Mikey Sammerstill is poised to have a very good, year two here, especially since he is more than likely going to slide back into his natural position here on the inside. So cannot wait to see what Mikey Sammerstill and this defense is going to do. So he does point him out. He does talk about Javon Kinlaw as well. And so I think that Javon Kinlaw also showed, some flashes here during that scrimmage. And so he does talk about how he's into some great shape right now. And then also too with Javon Kinlaw, it just seems like he's in a very good rhythm, really working back from the injuries that he had early on in his career, whatnot. And so I'm excited to see what he's looking like because it does seem like, much like Eddie Goldman, I think that these guys, they've taken some time off and stuff like that, either from injury or just being away or whatnot. And I think that these are two guys that I'm looking forward to seeing as far as just really getting into a good rhythm with this team this season. And so I can't wait to see what Javon Kinlaw is going to do, but good to see that he's showing some flashes and into some good shape. Next thing, he talks about Dorrance Armstrong a little bit. And so it looks like that Dorrance Armstrong did show some flashes during that as well. And so those were a couple key insights from that scrimmage. And so the next thing he talks about is Noah Anagami. And so I think that he talks about him being in two different positions talking about how he can be in the return game. And so he's kind of excited to see him into that role. And he did give us a little bit of insight as to, I like people on the edge a little bit, but just we have to reel it in. And so that kind of goes back into what I was talking about there yesterday in that Commanders Wire article where it said that things maybe got a little chippy there. And so it was good to see, that Noah Anagami, possibly extending his role this year as a returner. So we'll see what happens there. Next, going into Brandon Coleman. And so it looks like that Brandon Coleman hopefully getting closer to getting back out there. And then he said, with him missing time, obviously, just the time, the rep, the communication, that is obviously important. He did talk about Andrew Worley and then also to Nick Allegretti and just how they have been able to lead and just really making adjustments right now on the offensive line. So that was good to see, when he's talking about those guys stepping up. And so the next thing with Dan Quinn that he mentions is Zach Ertz, because I think he's asked about the tight ends. And he just talks about Zach Ertz and really how he takes the standards up for the Washington Commanders. And just really, when you think that you can't go anymore, you see a guy like Zach Ertz take it to another level. And I think he also mentions Bobby Wagner in there as well, but talks about the standards and really the knowledge that Zach Ertz shares to that tight end group to make them good. And then going back to the wide receivers. And so I think he's asked about a couple wide receivers here. And so he's asked about KJ Osborne. And so he said that his speed has been something that has flashed since the spring, and he likes the return element with him. And then with Michael Gallup, the speed, the deep routes, and kind of regaining that since, he's taken the year off and kind of getting back into it. So he's excited about those two as far as the wide receivers are concerned. And so the next thing he talks about is just, Jaden Daniels and just how it was rough, I think, yesterday in practice for the offense, but he liked the perspective that he was getting from Jaden Daniels. And so he loves that, just really knowing that that's a time for him to get better, get sharp, and the challenge that Jaden Daniels takes on with that. And so kind of giving us a little insight into that. And then lastly, there is something breaks, I guess, during the press conference there that they say that they are going to be canceling joint practice. And so he does acknowledge that they are going to be canceling the joint practice against the Ravens due to the scheduling conflict. And so that is something that he said he spoke to Coach Harbaugh about that, and they decided to go ahead and do so. And so makes a lot of sense. With the Washington Commanders getting ready to play on this Monday night, it would be a quick turnaround and things like that. So, look, the name of the game, you want to get out of preseason. You want to get out of camp. You want, your players and everybody to be healthy and ready to rock and roll for the long season. And so, it makes a lot of sense there from a schedule standpoint, and also to, with, I think, the Ravens and their scheduling and what they have going on with the preseason as well. And so that is something that did come up as well. And so next thing that I want to kind of jump into is just the roster moves that the Washington Commanders made. And so if you've not got a chance to see this, let's go ahead and start just really with the first, signing here. And so let's go with Daryl Worley. And so it looks like that Daryl Worley, who is mentioned as a safety initially in this presser here from Dan Quinn, he's listed as a corner, but he calls him a safety. And so he is signed to the roster at this point in time. And so with Daryl Worley, you're getting a player that definitely has some experience. He's been in the league since 2016. He's played with the Panthers, Raiders, Cowboys, Bills, Lions, Ravens, and Titans. Spent some time there with the Eagles and Cardinals very briefly. Looks like that he was in 99 games. He's had 64 starts, 344 tackles. He's had 6 INTs. And most notably, he had a pretty good performance against the Commanders. I think when he was playing for the Titans here, it says that he had 17 tackles in that game, which was actually a season high for him. He also had a pretty good season for the Titans, became a pretty solid defender for them. And so we get Daryl Worley coming over. And again, Dan Quinn says that he's a safety there in the press conference. And when you look up his stats and stuff, he's a corner. And so let's see how they elect to play him. But a guy that brings a lot of experience here. And like I said, the secondary has been flying around, making some plays. And so they get a chance to possibly become an even stronger unit here. So the next thing, too, that the Washington Commanders do is they end up picking up a wide receiver. And so they end up picking up River Cracraft. And so River Cracraft, been in the league since 2017. He played for Denver, the 49ers, Dolphins, Seahawks, Eagles. 53 total games for him, 32 receptions, 374 yards, 3 touchdowns. To me, just looking at some of his clips, he actually reminds me of our coach, or, he's part of our personnel now in Wes Welker. So he kind of reminds me a little bit of that. But this is a guy that's pretty speedy. And from what I'm seeing, he was able to kind of line up in the slot and stuff like that. And so we'll see, does he really carve out a niche and a role? Because this goes back to yesterday's video. I think that this is one of the things that this offense is going to need to solve going into week one, regardless of what happens with Terry McLaurin. And I mean, obviously we want Terry McLaurin out there, but if those guys get off to a slow start and things like that, you're going to need players that are going to have to step up. And so does he get a chance here in these next couple preseason games to possibly put his name in the hat to get out there? Let's see what happens there. And so next thing I wanted to talk about is really some of the key takeaways from practice here. And so this was really a walkthrough for the most part. I mean, it wasn't like a whole bunch out there. And so if you guys want to read about this, you can head over here and check this out. This article is actually on Hogs Haven if you want to look at some of the tweets and then the videos and things like that. So it looks like that they did practice in the bubble there. And so remember, they kind of revamped that. And so I believe it's a new, facility there with how they've gone ahead and refixed that up. And so what I saw in there was some good drills, especially from the offensive linemen. And so Josh Conley Jr. looked good in the drill. It was like him kind of coming off, showing his footwork, and then also too showing like the hands to kind of, get his hands out there, hit on a couple guys. And then the next thing the medicine ball flies to him and he bats that down. So, it was a good drill, to kind of work on your hands and just kind of work on firing off the ball and backpedaling and things like that. So that was good to see. Also too, I thought it was an interesting drill with the offensive linemen. They had like these weights that they were kind of holding, and it was kind of like simulating, when you're locked up with a guy and you're just moving, with that guy, keeping them away, from the pass or, from the quarterback. So you're pass protecting. And so it looks like they had a little weight. And so that was interesting to see that. But still, next thing you also saw too in the drills was just the wide receivers kind of working on getting off the ball. And so kind of, it's almost like if a corner were coming up to jam. And so it's like a quick initial move to either get to the inside or the outside of that corner and fire up the field. So I did see that they were doing that. It does say that Marcus Mariota was back on the field, so throwing some passes. And so that's good to see that he was back out there. Also, too, it looks like that Jordan McGee was out there jogging. And so that's good to see. And so he's been out of practice for a little bit. And then the next thing is also, too, it talks about that Jaden Daniels was putting in some work after practice with passing and things like that. And so that was cool. And then when it came down to Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt and him, and so it looks like that he had the non-contact jersey on today, but he was out there doing some pass drills and stuff like that. So coming out of the backfield and catching the football that way. And so, those were some of the real key takeaways here. No pads. It was in the bubble. Just seeing some of the drills and stuff like that. The offensive linemen looked pretty good out there. Receivers looking pretty good, firing off the ball or whatnot. So solid practice there. Those are the standouts. You guys let me know really in the comments what you guys are thinking as far as what Dan Quinn had to say today. Because again, I think it was just interesting to hear the insights about just that inter squad scrimmage. And I do think that this is something that certainly helps to elevate the coaches. And so, remember, that's what Dan Quinn definitely has a goal of, because he feels that if you elevate as coaches, it's naturally going to trickle down to the players. And so let's see, how that plays out this season. Thought it was great to hear some insights here on Jacob Martin. We haven't really talked about him very much, but I do think that, these guys that we have signed are going to be huge, for this defense, because it's not going to be, situations where maybe they're out there every down or whatnot. But if we're playing these guys in situations and stuff like that, you're trusting that they're going to be able to come in and execute the scheme. And this is, I think, really what Joe Witt Jr. is banking on this season, is just having that type of personnel to be that versatile and help this defense take it to another level. Cannot wait to see what we're going to get from Javon Kinlaw. He just seems like he could just do, just about everything here. And so let's see what happens with him. I'm excited to see him from a versatile standpoint, whether it's just getting down in the 3-point stance, whether it is, coming as a standing rusher, whatever it's going to look like, because I do think that they're going to use him in a variety of ways. And so good to see that he's showing some good flashes. And it's great to see that Dan Quinn acknowledging that this guy's into some great shape. And it looks like that he's getting into a good rhythm after just dealing with the injuries and stuff like that. You guys also let me know what you're thinking here with these roster moves. Again, we got a wide receiver that is coming in along with a corner. It's listed as, but Dan Quinn calls him a safety. And so we'll see how that plays out. We also, too, did lose a wide receiver until we released him. It was actually Michael Strawn. And so he was released today. And so he's gone. And that is where you see that we brung in a wide receiver in River Cracraft. And so you guys let me know in the comments what you're thinking. And as we always say, go Commanders. And I will see you guys on the next one. All right. Peace.